Hello, my name is Rukia Bulle. I'm a journalist and also a content creator. And today I have Tirana Hassan with me in the studio. She's the executive director of Human Rights Watch, and we're just going to have a conversation. Hi,
Thanks for having me.
Tirana.
Hi, Rukia.
How
Nice
are you
to see you.
doing?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Of course. You have an impressive career in the field of human rights. What initially inspired you to dedicate yourself to the human rights advocacy?
I think it was a long journey. My own family has its stories of displacement and movement and standing up to power. And I think that informed my history. My father is from Pakistan, so he was born in India before Pakistan existed. And, knew as a child that his family didn't have a choice when they left India, and they left because they were Muslim living in a predominantly Hindu area. And so, like thousands of other families, they moved, and my father had the experience of displacement. But we never talked about it as a human rights issue. It wasn't until I was much later that, I grew up. I was born in Singapore, and Singapore is a thriving democracy on the surface. But actually, in the 1970s, when my father was working there as an academic, they didn't take well to any sort of critique of government policies. And he wrote a book that drew the ire of the government, and that forced us to leave to Australia. So I have this history of knowing what it is to stand up to power and knowing how important it is.
And what do you think are the key challenges and opportunities in Lebanon's path to stability and peace?
Well, Lebanon, as everybody would recognize, is really at a very important juncture right now. There is obviously an opportunity for Lebanon to, finally get the sort of legal reforms that are required. I think for Lebanon to develop a government that is truly representative of its people, that represents the will of its people, a government that could be, if they wanted to be, and I think we have heard the right statements coming out from the president and the new prime minister, that they are willing to address issues of corruption. But there are some really key issues that will need to be at the bedrock of the future of Lebanon, and that is rebuilding trust. The Lebanese people must trust the institutions, and to trust the institutions, that means that there needs to be a commitment to progress, for example, things like accountability for the Beirut blast, which killed and destroyed the lives of thousands of Lebanese people. That legal process has been stalled for the last few years. So, I hope there is a commitment from the new Lebanese authorities. And obviously, you can't wash over the fact that the conflict in the south between Hezbollah and Israel has devastated communities in the south that must be rebuilt. And I think if the new Lebanese government wants a future that is stable and that sends a new message, it's about ensuring that there is no more impunity for crimes that are committed. And one thing that Human Rights Watch would like to see is that the Lebanese authorities actually sign the Rome Statute and join the International Criminal Court to ensure that the people of the south have access to justice.
And what do you think are the main obstacles to regional integration when it comes to the Sahel, in the Sahel and West Africa?
Well, I mean, we are in a much more complicated issue right now when it comes to the Sahel. We have now the Sahelian countries pulling back from, the regional bodies. We have isolation. We also have a incredible jihadist threat. And it's also about how these governments are actually fighting that jihadist threat too. One thing that Human Rights Watch has been looking at over the last few years is actually the security response to what has been happening. And we have seen that security forces have acted with impunity, and actually in their efforts to sort of counter the insurgency or the Islamic threat, the Islamist threat, they have actually killed hundreds of civilians and villagers in remote areas, and there's been no justice, accountability, or any sort of proper investigation. So peace and security is a huge part of what needs to happen, but also you can't turn a blind eye to the fact that these three governments, we see a series of coups that have occurred. For peace and security, then we must uphold democracy. And really, this is an opportunity not just for Europe, not just for the world, but actually for Africa also, to ensure there's accountability and stability in the Sahel.
You speak of instability. That makes me think of recently President Trump spoke about proposing that the US would take over or own the Gaza Strip. That means if that happens, approximately over 2 million Palestinians will be displaced. What is Human Rights Watch? What action will it take to combat with this? Because it will be a breach of international law.
Well, you actually said it. The main issue here not only is this morally incomprehensible, the idea of just permanently displacing 2 million Palestinians from their home, who, let's remember, this would not be the first time that they have been displaced. But this is, now after this devastating war, which has really reduced the Gaza Strip to rubble, where people still who have been displaced in the south are trying to return to their homes, even though they know that there is nowhere for them to really live. This idea that you can forcibly remove people into the regional country, the neighboring countries, is not only, as I said, morally reprehensible, it is also illegal under international law, and there will be consequences for that. Forced displacement is a crime under international law, and what we would see what would happen if there was a forced displacement of this level in the Gaza Strip to neighboring countries could actually amount to ethnic cleansing. And that would actually make the US government complicit in the crime of ethnic cleansing and in the crime of forced displacement. So, that sort of forcible transfer is illegal under international law, and, perpetrators of those sort of crimes must be held accountable.
I think the world is wondering who actually will hold them accountable. Is it the international organizations, United Nations Security Council perhaps? And what are the steps someone would take to hold them accountable if they go through with this?
I think let's actually not go to the worst case scenario, because we know what the systems are. There are international tribunals. We have the International Court of Justice. We have the International Criminal Court. There are regional bodies. There are domestic proceedings that could occur to hold perpetrators to account, whether that's the US government, whether that's individual commanders who carry out those actions. Those exist. We know what those pathways are, and we have seen through public statements even that this is a policy. But let's talk about what can happen to actually stop it, because the consequences of displacing the people from Gaza would be catastrophic. And, it sends a message to the world that, that another country can come in and take over land, which we know from the Russia-Ukraine example that this is completely illegal. So, let's talk about what can be done now to stop these preposterous ideas being placed on the table. And first and foremost, there needs to be a message from world leaders all over the world to say that these sort of actions will not be tolerated. World leaders need to ensure that they are sending a very clear message to the Trump administration, no matter how belligerent they want to act, no matter how belligerent they are in their statements. That does not detract from the fact that world leaders do have power. Of course, we have the multilateral institutions like the UN Security Council, but with the US sitting on the Security Council and having a veto, we know that that's highly unlikely. But we have seen strong statements from Arab countries, which not only are saying that they will not accept such a ridiculous proposal, but are also maintaining the line about what the solution is. And the solution here is nothing but a two-state solution. That is what I have heard during the Munich Security Conference, clearly articulated from people like Jordan's foreign minister, to ensure that there is a way for Israeli and Palestinians to live not only in peace, but with their rights and for the ability for them to return to their homes.
DRC continues to face severe human rights violations. We know that recently, particularly in the eastern regions, there have been cases of sexual violence against numerous children and women. I mean, what will HRW do to address the situation from escalating in the region?
Actually, I have a colleague who is currently in DRC. I have colleagues. Human Rights Watch has been working in DRC, particularly in Goma and in Kivu in the north of the country, where the conflict is now raging at a peak, I should say. It's been ongoing for many years. But we have documented these horrific crimes that have been going on. We're talking about the blatant targeting and destruction of communities. I think one of the most shocking trademarks of the violence in Eastern Congo, but particularly right now, has been the levels of sexual violence. Just recently, we saw the reports of M23 and also Rwandan troops raping women in Goma as they entered the city, but also going into the reports of them going into the prison and raping women in the women's prison. These are horrific crimes. The damage is, irreparable. They not only have raped women, they have also killed many of the civilians and those that have just been trying to flee. And there has to be accountability. First and foremost, what we are seeing, and I should say one thing, we know that there are M23 rebels. We know that Rwandan troops are also fighting the Democratic Republic of Congo's army also. And we have also documented sexual violence being committed by the Democratic Republic of Congo's army officers as well. So there needs to be accountability from all sides. But in this particular moment in time, there needs to be international mobilization to actually send a message to Rwanda, who have been supporting and enabling M23 in this attack, have joined their forces. And we have not seen the sort of robust international response to put pressure on the Rwandans to pull back their troops and stop these violations. And that needs to happen now. We're talking about Europe using both its economic leverage, its political leverage, but also from countries across the region to, immediately call on Rwanda to stop and put in specific targeted sanctions.
In Kenya, it was recently recorded by Kenya National Human Rights Commission that over 80 people were abducted and have been missing since June to December 2024 during the anti-government protests. And recently people have been reappearing and others, their bodies have been found in different places within the city. I mean, is Human Rights Watch aware of this? And if it is, how will it hold the Kenyan government accountable for these actions?
We were following the protests very closely, and we have been documenting the excessive use of force by the Kenyan security forces during the protests, which led to people being shot and some of them being killed. And those included children. Who are out on the streets. And, that is where we have been working with, very committed, strong Kenyan civil society and Kenyan legal human rights lawyers who have been taking cases forward and continue to work. We work with them to investigate these matters. There has been a history in Kenya of security forces in the past disappearing people, whether it be critics or or others, these must be investigated first and foremost, and then the perpetrators must be held to account. Now, Kenya is a democracy. Kenya does have a functioning legal system, and there is an absolute necessity to ensure that the evidence is brought forward and put in front of the in front of the judges, in front of the courts, to hold the security forces to account. I think one thing that has happened, when you look at the protests that happened in Kenya, people are telling the Kenyan government that they are tired, that they don't want the corruption anymore, that they are tired of the, mismanagement, that the cost of living has become so unbearable, and it is continuously the people of Kenya, everyday people, who are bearing the price of this. And it is it is on the Kenyan authorities to listen and to respond and to address some of these root causes, as well as ensuring that they end the impunity of abuses by the security forces.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that is all for now. Thank you for joining us at YouTube studio. And until we see you guys next time.